Hi. Oh, how exciting. Well, I'm sort of the northern Great Plains representative, I think, here today. I work up in Sydney, Montana, which is 2 hours south of the Canadian border and 15 miles west of the border in North Dakota. And today I'm going to be talking about a really large scale, both spatially and temporally, experiment that we're just getting started in Miles City, Montana, which is a little further south and west of me. I'm going to give you background on the project, talk about the removal technique that we used on Russian olives. This is the Russian olive experiment. Russian olive is a very interesting sort of a conflict species in the northern Great Plains. It's highly invasive in riparian areas. It's one of the few trees that will grow in upland areas. So our upland farmers really like it for windrows and soil stabilization. It's a highly desirable tree in the upland areas, and it's a highly undesirable tree in riparian areas. We did a revegetation experiment, which I'll talk to you about briefly, and then outcomes of this experiment, which we will probably not realize for 20 years. So this is my the benefit of working for the government is at least so far, our funding is rather sustainable, at least for inexpensive long-term monitoring projects. And hopefully, actually, you'll see through the course of my talk that if you yourself are conducting Russian olive removal, you may actually already be part of this experiment and part of this experimental framework for looking at the results of removing Russian olive in riparian areas. So Russian olive is planted in windrows, as you can see in the top left corner. It's flying over North Dakota is amazing. You can just see hundreds of trees and lines all over North Dakota, and it's invasive along streams in the Great Plains. The bottom right picture is of near our site on the Yellowstone River. Now, the Yellowstone River runs east across the southern part of Montana, and it's an undammed river, which makes this an interesting study system. So the first question we had at Fort Keogh Livestock Research Laboratories, they have a lot of Yellowstone River frontage on this property, and their goal is to grow cows. Right? For the Department of Agriculture in Montana, there's not a whole lot of other things to grow, so we grow cows. And Russian olive is a thick, shrubby tree. There's not a lot that grows underneath it. It really basically, Russian olive prevents it the landscape from being used for forage production. So we needed to remove it, but we wanted to also ask, if we revegetate, is that going to prevent secondary invasion, either by Russian olive or other nasty invaders such as saltcedar and appleweed? So part of this study is to really look at ecological benefits of weed removal and revegetation. As Fred mentioned, a lot of Russian olive throughout the West is infesting private property. And so part of this project is to determine the economic cost of removal and some of the maybe ecological benefits of removal. So we're doing some multi-trophic measures. We're looking at soil health, we're looking at birds, we're looking at insects, we're looking at diversity and abundance, we're looking at the quality of understory vegetation, again, getting at that economic benefit. Can you get a lot better forage when you remove Russian olive? One of the things we're not measuring in this experiment, which is unfortunate, but several people have mentioned how our riparian tree invaders really do impact human use of landscapes and prevent human use, and it's something I'd like to do in other studies around this. So we did the novel technique of measuring soil health, bird and insect diversity, and the quality of understory vegetation before we removed. So we'll have a very nice timeline. Then we have initial conditions, and we'll have removal, and we can track recovery over time. So we're going to we have 4 different revegetation protocols, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We want to know if the success of our revegetation depends on what we use. Are some species more successful than others? We're also looking at Russian olive resprout rates. We want to know how successful our initial technique was, and again, whether any re-veg treatments that we do might minimize the amount of resprouting. And we're also going to be looking at natural rates of Russian olive regeneration, both in our removal plots and then also reference plots where we didn't remove. So this is our study site. This is the Yellowstone River. We have 4 removal plots, and then we established 2 reference plots to again look at changes in communities over time where Russian olive hasn't been removed. Again, to try and quantify to landowners the benefits of removal. We also have to look at what happens in systems where we don't remove. So we conducted our removal, and we only used one removal technique, which I'll tell you that in a little bit, in the spring of 2011. We fenced the plots in the summer, and we did our revegetation spring of last year. As you can see here, the shrubby growth of the Russian olive trees. And so here's our study design for as far as vegetation goes. We planted just the herbaceous layer in the large plots, the shrub layer with an herbaceous, trees with herbaceous, and then we did a combination. The expertise I brought to this project is that I am a grassland evolutionary ecologist and study competition and facilitation in grasses. So this has been a very steep learning curve for me. I was very interested to see if trees and shrubs facilitated each other. So we did this combination. We also have large plots where we performed no revegetation, right? Because we want to, revegetation is expensive, and we don't have to do it. This is a very, very important treatment to have in addition to our reference plots where we didn't remove Russian olive. We need to have Russian olive removed, but not revegetated again to really evaluate if it's worth paying the money to revegetate. So clearly, tree removal results in a change in architecture here. This is basically here. This is our removal area. Fort Keogh has some really beautiful cottonwood galleries that have this shrubby understory of Russian olive in it. And you would expect this to actually provide some ecosystem services. If you use ecosystem services as a value-neutral term, right? This is a structural element as well as a biotic element. It may provide habitat. It definitely, we know Russian olive is a nitrogen fixer. That can have extreme effects on soils and may also affect their ability to revegetate after removal. So tracking over time is important, right? We're planting trees and shrubs in here. We're going to eventually replace this middle story of architecture here. And so it may take 10 or 15 years, but eventually we may see this level, if not this abundance, replaced here. And so we need to be able to track that far and able to determine how much of Russian olive's effect is due to its architecture versus its biology. So now I'll move into what removal technique we used. So this removal is really the start of many removals that will be done on this property. We wanted to use science to inform how to best perform our future removals on the site. So what we did is we questioned land managers in the northern Great Plains who had conducted Russian olive removals, and about 70 of them told us what worked and what didn't for them. And they were working in both riparian and upland habitats. So they used chainsaws, they used tree shears, they used partial saws and timber axes, and they reported resprout rates anywhere from 3 to 60% of their trees. And we found that the people who were reporting very low resprout rates were using a tree shear with triclopyr application immediately afterwards. And they did find that retreatment was necessary. It's not a single entry enterprise. You have to go back. There will be resprouts. We were also told not to use Invasive because then you get a whole dead zone below the tree that you sprayed. And almost all of them reported that weeds were a problem with removal. So we knew this was something we needed to take into account in our research. So we took the self-reported best practices of these 70 land managers, and we used a tree shear with spray attachment, and we applied triclopyr with basal bark oil to the cut stump within 15 minutes of the cut. And then in the following year, we sprayed the Resprouts. We cut down a lot of trees. I really shouldn't say we. This was Jen from Rocher. We cut down all these trees. This is an example of one of our plots. So again, we see that middle architecture story of Russian olive. Before Jen removed all the trees, this is post-removal. And as Fred pointed out, not a whole lot grows underneath Russian olive. And also, the practice of removing Russian olive is tremendously destructive to the understory. So we have a lot of bare ground here. We had a 50-year flood event on the Yellowstone in 2011, which is definitely going to affect the trajectory that we see through time in these plots. In the fall, these are all cottonwood Resprouts here, establishment here. So that was really fun to see, and it's going to be fun to track through time. So we only saw a 0.4% stump resprout rate. A total of 4% of our trees resprouted, but a lot of those were root sprouts because of the flooding. So as far as our cutting and herbicide technique, I feel that it's extremely effective. I think one of the reasons that it was extremely effective is we had a highly invested person doing removal and stump treatment. We counted Russian olive seedling densities in the fall, and we found that our removal did stimulate germination of Russian olive. So it's another reason why you got to go in and respray. We had in our control and our reference plots where we did not remove Russian olive, we had very few new seedlings established. So we're not sure how much of this difference in seedlings between removal and the reference plots was due to the flooding. So our revegetation experiment is does revegetation affect recovery over time? Does it affect the reestablishment of Russian olive? Does it affect secondary invasion of plants like knapweed and saltcedar? And does revegetation affect our insect diversity and abundance and our soil biotic diversity and abundance? And does combining life history forms within our revegetation help meet the goals for the above factors? If we want diverse insect communities, we may need to provide a functionally diverse plant community, which means herbaceous layer and trees and shrubs. You would expect that to support the greatest diversity of insects, the greatest diversity and stability in soil biota, and also in birds. So again, here, really my hypothesis is that this will result in the most functional community. This is the most difficult and the most expensive way to revegetate. So again, it's all about quantifying not only is this the most effective, but how much difference is there between these treatments? Is it worth spending the money? Is it worth spending the effort? So every year we're doing a bird survey. Every year we're sending soil samples to soilfoodweb.com for soil biotic analysis, trophic food web stuff. We're also conducting SweepNet pitfall samples of insects every year. These are very expensive and time-consuming to analyze, and so basically we're not analyzing these data, we're simply collecting it. And freezers are cheap relative to labor to sort insects, so we're just keeping it until we can get the money to analyze these data. And again, we're collecting vegetation cover every year. We're doing both random sampling design and permanent vegetation transects in the photo plates. So here's an example of the outcome of our study. So we have an indicator here, a dependent variable such as weed abundance or functional diversity of our soil biota. And we really expect that pre-removal, our control or reference plots, our removal with no revegetation, and our removal with revegetation will all be similar. But we expect that maybe over time, the trajectories of these three different treatments will be different. And even within the removal reveg, our four treatments may differ among one another. Thank you. So as Cara mentioned, maybe collecting data every year is overkill, through time. This would be, so if I'm looking at, this would be another site where Russian olive exists. See if it changes through time across space. So do our plots in South Dakota with Russian olive change through time similarly to our plots in Montana, to our plots in Colorado? And then maybe we'll see if another party does a removal experiment that their change through time is different than ours. So we've actually been able to use this approach to add sites to our study. We added 5 sites to our study in collaboration with the Missouri River Watershed Coalition. I'll go back. So the beauty of this design is our control plots. So we have the control, meaning no removal. So we have our reference plots where we didn't remove Russian olive, and we also have our control plots where we removed Russian olive and didn't conduct revegetation. So the Missouri River Watershed Coalition started their removal project this year. We were able to go and take baseline data. They're not revegetating. But luckily, because we have this yes removal, no reveg, we can compare our plots to theirs. And now we have a really nice time series because their plots didn't flood this year. So we can keep adding plots and keep adding space to this experiment and really ask about ecosystem change and ecosystem assembly after we remove a major architectural element to riparian systems. So this has huge implications for just basic ecosystem science as well as the most applied applications of creating desirable communities. Okay, so in summary, our method was very effective at cutting the stump and doing immediate basal bark herbicide. We think that the tree shear is super important to create a clean cut. Sometimes if you use a chainsaw, it roughens it up. It might prevent the herbicide from getting right into that vascular cambium. This experiment will be tracked over time. We had a drought this year, major water years and drought. So we actually didn't have an establishment of our seeds in our herbaceous layer. We're going to give it 3 years because that's what NRCS suggests that we do. So we're going to wait before we try and reseed again. And because this research has education components, it's created a lot of funding opportunities for us. It's being conducted on public land. It's an ARS research facility. We have the ability to turn it into a demonstration project. This project is massive. I hope it's the most logistically complicated thing I ever do, especially since I've committed to doing it for about 20 years. I don't know if I have time for questions or not, but I also wanted to mention, if you don't see me at lunch, I will be at the poster session. I will be in front of my colleague's poster, Kevin Delaney. He wasn't able to be here, so I'll be presenting his poster for him. Thanks.
We do have a few minutes for questions.
Way in the back.
Woo!
Everyone awake?
So the question was, what happened to the biomass after we cut the trees down? And what we did was pilot, the Missouri River Watershed Coalition actually has a biofuels component to their project. So they're piloting it, and then they're going to basically pelletize it and then have it available for fuel. But we didn't do that at our initial project. I really liked who was it who was talking earlier today, talking about, you can plant things inside the piles, and I'm trying to push Fort Keogh to do that, plant trees in it, because I know in California it's been shown that trees, you're shielding trees from herbivory if you can plant them inside slash piles. The people at Fort Keogh would like to burn them and just want to shake them and talk about carbon sequestration. So we'll see. I don't get to control that part of the project. Right now they're piles. Thank you.